Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are just about at 8:30. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order here, if you could find your way to your seats. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brian, and I am an alcoholic. This is a one-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. That's 301 North Main Street in Doylestown, PA. We have food and fellowship for this group every week starting at 8 o'clock, and then our speaker comes on at 8:30, so feel free to join us early, enjoy the coffee. We usually have hot dogs and other refreshments and snacks. If you want to get involved in service with this group, show up early, even better. We do have a business meeting for this group, meet 7 p.m. to 7:30. So again, if you want to get involved in service, become a part of this group, see me, see any home group member after the meeting. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teaching of the 12 steps. We record all our speakers so that others can benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. So if there's anybody that's new at this meeting for the first time or maybe visiting from out of town that would like to introduce themselves on a first name basis so we can welcome you. Yeah. Courtney. Welcome. Yeah. Welcome. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Dan. Welcome. Yeah. Alcoholic. Welcome. In the back there. Matt. Welcome. Get everybody here? Get everybody? Cool, awesome. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with a working knowledge of the 12 steps and who's willing to sponsor, please raise their hands. So we got people willing to be sponsors here. If you are new, grab one of those people after the meeting. It's always a whole group of us breaking down the meeting. So grab one of those people after the meeting. We'd love to talk with you, get you some phone numbers, some meeting lists, get you involved into the solution a little bit. Does anybody have any announcements for the good of AA? Anybody have anything going on? No? Nothing? A couple of quick announcements from this group. This group does have a sister group. It's a big book study meeting that meets Thursdays at 7:30. Just up the road from here, it's at Salem UCC Church. That's 186 East Court Street. And again, the coffee for that meeting's on at 6:15 every week, so feel free to come early and join us if you want to enjoy some fellowship. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purchase of big books to help those who cannot afford them can put their donations in that jar on the back table there, marked Big Book and CD donations. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group at Doylestown. We post all our speakers from this meeting on there. I always say it's a good resource to have if you come here and you hear a message of hope that you think somebody else can benefit from. Makes it real easy to share with other people on YouTube there. We have our whole library of speakers from over the years, so there's a lot of powerful stuff on there if you want to go explore. We also have a Facebook page. We post all our speakers, weekly on the Facebook page. We post any events we might have going on, workshops, and, all the other groups in the area post their anniversaries, celebrations, workshops, and things they have going on. So it's a really good resource to have to stay tied in with just happenings in AA throughout the whole area here. With that, I am going to bring Jason up here. Jason is going to read our Just for Today prayer of recovery. Please help me give a warm welcome to Jason.
Hi everybody, I'm Jason, I'm an alcoholic. Just for today, prayer of recovery. Just for today, I will be agreeable. I will look as well as I can. Dress becomingly, talk low, act courteously, criticize not one bit, not find fault with anything, and not try to improve or regulate anybody except myself. If you can, put your hands together and help me welcome Jen to the stage.
Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Jennifer and I'm an alcoholic. This is the AA preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, and neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. And now we'll welcome the young, handsome Thomas up here to read the 12 steps.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Thomas, and I'm an alcoholic. And these are the 12 steps of recovery. Number one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure others, them or others. Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And with all that being said, we're going to help me welcome Brian back up to the stage to introduce our speaker.
Quick personal announcement. Any of you that are familiar with this meeting are probably familiar with my good friend Kara. Kara does a ton of service for this group, right? And a ton of service for AA. And Kara celebrated 10 years of sobriety yesterday. So I congratulate Kara. If you see her after the meeting, say congratulations to her. But we love all you do, Kara. We love you. Thank you. With that, we do have a 7th tradition. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, we'll see that the basket makes its way around. There are no dues or fees for AA membership, but we do have expenses, and your contributions do help us to cover the costs of big books, CDs, events, workshops, refreshments, so we do appreciate it. There is absolutely no smoking on the church property. It's the church's policy, not ours. They give us this beautiful facility to hold our meeting in every week, and really all they ask is that we keep the premise clean. So just kind of be considerate of that as you're coming and going from the meeting. Wait until you leave here. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. And now to introduce our speaker for tonight, a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group, on loan to us from the Sobriety and Beyond Group of Morris Plains, New Jersey. Please help me welcome Anthony J.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Anthony. I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank you guys for having me out tonight. My sobriety date is October 9, 2013, and for that, I owe everything to this program, the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous as they're outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, good sponsorship, and a loving and caring God who I knew nothing about before entering these rooms. So I'll kind of tell you guys what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I was born in Morristown, New Jersey. If anybody's familiar, it's about an hour and 15 minutes away from here. It's a beautiful ride. I'd love to see you guys come out to my home group, Sobriety and Beyond. It's 8 p.m. Monday nights. We go through a step per week. It is a men's meeting, so all men are welcome. If you ever happen to be in that area and you're a female, I'd be glad to link you up with some females in the area as well. So for me, I had a fairly average upbringing to all outside appearances. Everything seemingly looked very normal on the outside, but what was happening behind closed doors was a little bit different than what the rest of the world saw, right? And my mom and my dad fought regularly. We lived in these apartment townhouses right across the street from the hospital where I was born. And for us, my sisters and I have two younger sisters, one of whom is severely autistic. I say that because it comes up at a later part in my story, so I just want to put it in context. For us, what we saw every day was, fighting, violence, aggression, yelling, but you don't know what you don't know. And that was the only experience that I had to go off of, right? So it was seemingly very normal. And kind of went through life for some years like that, and eventually my mom kicked my dad out of the house. My mom then told my sisters and I that my dad left because we weren't worthy and that he wanted nothing to do with us. And, I don't know if it was that or if it was just alcoholism purely that kind of instilled in me a feeling of worthlessness, right, from a very early age. And I talk a little bit about some of the emotions and some of the character defects, if you will, that preceded my first drink, right? Because I think that for a lot of us, we know that we drank, we know that we used some non-conference approved dry goods here and there, but I don't think we always talk about what brings us together, right, before and after the drink. And for me, there was this distinct feeling of aloneness, right? No matter where I went, I felt separate from. I was always seemingly disconnected, and it was something that I had no idea was going on, right? I had nothing to compare this to. I'm, 5, 6-year-old kid, and I remember going to a Christmas gathering, and I'm surrounded in a room full of family members. I've known these people my whole life. I see them every holiday. And I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, man, this is strange. Because there's all of them, and then there's me, right? And I just felt like a total stranger wherever I went. And that kind of just followed me around as long as I could remember, as far back as I could remember. And around the age of 8, I would say, my mom got in some trouble with the law. She was part owner of a bowling alley in Morris County, and they were selling some things on the side, which you can't sell out of a bowling alley or anywhere else in the United States. And she was indicted along with 56 other people. It was one of the biggest sting operations that ever occurred in Morris County at that point. A lot of people went to jail. My mom was one of them. And my sisters and I were told that your mom's going away to school, right? And my mom went to school a lot thereafter, and that just became a normal part of my story. And my sisters and I were displaced. We ended up staying at my grandparents' house, and my grandparents effectively raised me for a little while. And after a couple years of fighting back and forth, my dad applied for custody, and my sisters and I transitioned to live with my father down in Brick in Ocean County, New Jersey. And, I was just starting to get acquainted with some of the kids in the school that I was going to in Morristown. And I switched down to Ocean County, and again, there's kind of this feeling of separateness and not really being able to jive with these kids. And one of the earliest memories that I have, and I remember this didn't come out until I wrote my first 4-step. I was walking down the hallway in school with some of my friends, and my class is heading in one direction, and my sister's class, which is the special needs class, is coming in our direction. We're about to pass in the hallway. And as we're walking past, some of the kids in my class started to make fun of my sister and her friends, started to call them things, that weren't very nice, and started to make fun of the kids that were in special ed. And I got this feeling in the pit of my stomach that I got to tell these kids to stop, right? Because they're grilling my sister and her friends, and I know it's not right. And instead of telling them to stop, the feeling of wanting to be accepted overpowered me, and I joined in with them, and I made fun of my sister and her friends, right? And that would become a very common occurrence in my life, right? I was willing to do anything to feel like I was connected. I wanted to be accepted so bad that I was willing to go to really any lengths. And, so life kind of went on like that. And that was like really one of the ugliest things that I did looking back. And that's far before I picked up a drink or a drug. I'm probably 9 years old at that time, right? And so I started playing sports, and I was reasonably good at football. And, at the age of like 12, I could grab a regulation basketball hoop. And it was, things were going good. My athletics were going decent. And one evening, I'm skateboarding across a street down in Brick. And if anybody knows how skateboarding works, you don't always look straight ahead. Sometimes you're looking to the side as you're coasting. And I'm coasting along, and I'm kind of in this right of way. And it's a red light to the oncoming traffic. And I have a buddy, Tyler, who's behind me about 20 feet on his bicycle. And I hear him scream, "Stop." And I look from here, straight ahead, see headlights. So I got hit by a car going about 40 miles an hour was the estimate. And I broke all the bones in both my legs, and I was in a coma. And I woke up in the hospital, and they had airlifted me to Jersey Shore Medical Center down in Neptune, New Jersey. They put my legs back together, and I woke up a couple weeks later, and I looked down, and you could put your hand through my legs. They were in multiple pieces being held together with pins and rods. And the doctor came in and said, "Oh, thank God you're awake. We didn't know if you were going to make it," right? And instead of being grateful, I was immediately, infinitely resentful, right? Because now the only thing that I ever have been somewhat decent at, athletics, is gone. And I know that right on the spot. That whole thing just evaporates, right? And so I spent some time in the hospital, and they put me back together. I got transferred to a specialized rehab for children to learn how to walk again. And one of my roommates in that hospital was this 9-year-old boy, Nathan. And Nathan had 6 open heart surgeries by the age of 9, and they were giving him 6 months to a year to live. And every time I saw Nathan, he had a smile on his face, and he was like, "Anthony, what's wrong? Like, life's so great, right?" And this kid's got 6 months to a year to live. And I just can't get out of my head about how unfair life is to me and how deeply, personally, I've been afflicted by this thing called life, right? And I just had a total inability to even realize that anybody else on this earth had feelings, because it was always about me, right? Self-centeredness to the core. And our book talks about that, right? I can't get out of my own head. I'm selfish. And that causes me to act out and with all these other defects, which I'll get into. In any event, I get out of the hospital, and around that time I was about 13. I get out of the hospital, I can't walk, I'm in a wheelchair half the day, I'm using a walker the other half the day. And some of the kids in my grade are starting to, they're starting to smoke weed, they're stealing weed from their brother or whatever. People are starting to steal liquor from their parents' liquor cabinet. Normal stuff, right? But up until that point, I never wanted to drink or use anything, because I saw kind of what it did to my mother, and my family was really gravely affected by this stuff. But I was so defeated, and kind of just, the accident really, kind of propelled me into what would happen next, which I believe would have happened either way, by the way. But in any event, I had no defense, right? I picked up that drink, and I remember drinking this beer. And, like it was my first drink, and I'm drinking, tasted terrible, right? But everybody was doing it, and I'm in, right? And the beer kind of lit up my stomach. That warm, fuzzy feeling you get when the alcohol hits your stomach, and it kind of lights you up from the inside out. And as that effect started to take hold, I started to experience basically the promises that we talk about in the 9 step. A lot of the promises came true for me when I drank, right? All of a sudden, I'm not afraid of people, right? I intuitively know how to handle these situations, which used to baffle me, right? And all of a sudden, alcohol does for me what I can't do for myself. And it solves the problem that I never knew I had, right? And instantly, alcohol became my master, right? It did everything for me. Now, I'm like 13, 14 years old at this time. I have no idea that that's happening, right? I just think that I'm having a good time with my buddies, and it's normal. Everybody drinks, right? That's what kids do in high school and middle school, whatever, no problem. And so, for me, this is definitely a progressive disease. It always gets worse, never gets better, right? Like, unless it's treated properly. And I started to drink as often as I possibly could. And my drinking really accelerated very quickly. And within about a year, my father says to me, he says, Anthony, listen, he says, you got two little sisters here. You're acting erratically. I never know which version of you is going to show up at 11 o'clock, midnight, right? Like, you come home whenever you want, you're not going to school, you're not following any rules, and then you come home and then you're having a tantrum over God knows what. He says, either stop drinking or get out of the house. What I heard was, get out of the house. I didn't even hear the first part, because to me, not drinking isn't an option, right? That's not even on the horizon for me. And so I left. Right? I left the house, and I used that whole situation as a grounds for telling people, if you had the life I had, you would do what I do too, right? Like, I got hit by a car. My dad kicked me out when I'm 15. I'm homeless at 15, right? Like, and I'm using all these things to justify my behavior. No problem. And I was on the free lunch program in school, and one of the things with the free lunch program is when you go to collect your lunch, they check off your name, right? So my buddies and I, we would drink, or we would do whatever we did before school. I wouldn't show up to any classes. I would go into school, collect my free lunch, and then I would leave. And I just never made any classes. So the one day I get called into the vice principal's office, and Mr. Kennedy tells me, he says, Anthony, you haven't been in any classes for this whole semester, but you got lunch every single day. What's going on here, right? And I tried to tell him my tale of woe, how life was treating me unfair, and that they should just kind of let this happen. They didn't see it that way. And I was asked to leave school, right? And little by slowly, I'm getting more and more removed from, any community, any fellowship, right? And the more I get removed, the more I feel justified in my behaviors and my drinking. And so my drinking really took off at that point. I'm 16, I'm not in school, I'm bouncing from couch to couch, living wherever I could. And by 17, I'm committing, adult crimes. And when you're committing adult crimes, sometimes you get charged with adult charges. And that's what happened. I got charged with grand larceny and some other stuff, and I went to adult jail at 17, and that would begin my long saga of incarceration. And so when I turned 18, something very special happened, or so I thought. The car accident that I was in got settled, and I got a structured settlement. And when I turned 18, I got the first installment of this structured settlement. And I got a check for $60,000 when I was 18. Now, up until this point, I never had any money. I've been homeless for like the last 3 years, right? I have no design for living. I'm living on self-will, right? Completely propelled by whatever I want to do at any given moment. And I was pretty certain that money was going to solve all my problems. And seemingly it did for a while. Things were going as well as you would expect, right? I bought this little townhouse down in Seaside. I'm living on the water. I have a jet ski. I have a Cadillac. I had an 86 Monte Carlo SS. I really wish that I still had that car, but things were going well, right? And I started doing some non-conference approved dry goods, which I won't get too much into because I respect the house I'm in, right? And I'll bring that full circle back in just a second, but some of those things really took off. And around that time, there was something called Oxycontin that was a real big hit. And those things really did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And after I tried that stuff, within 6 months I was completely broke, right? So I did what any thug would do. I called grandma, right? And I called grandma and I said, Grandma, I have nowhere to live. Can I live with you? She said, yeah, come on up. So I moved back up to Morristown. And now I'm back in Morristown and I'm committing all types of crimes to feed my habits. And I ended up robbing an older man at an ATM at the PNC Bank in Morristown. And when I ran up to him, I grabbed his hand, which had his money. He was transferring it from the ATM into his wallet. I decided that I needed the money more than he did, so I took off with it. And he fell over and hit his head, and he started bleeding. And the police showed up, and I took off, and then he told the police that I had a gun. So now I'm a fugitive for an armed robbery at a bank in Morristown. And Morristown, like many other towns, doesn't take very kindly to that type of behavior. And within a few hours, the task force kicked my grandma's door down. Turns out banks have a lot of cameras, and I wasn't wearing a mask, so they knew right where to find me. And I went to jail, and I'm up on the max security unit. And my bunkie, my roommate, somebody who was later convicted for having his wife killed, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, man, this really got out of hand. I probably shouldn't do any of those dry goods anymore. Maybe I should just drink like a gentleman, like our book talks about. If I ever get out of here, I think I'll just stick to booze. And so after about 6 months, I come up with this great plan, and I call my grandma and I say, Grandma, listen. I said, why don't you come get me out of here? She's like, Anthony, I'd love to get you out of there, but your bail's $100,000. I don't have $100,000. I said, no, I know, but they have this option where you can put your house up as collateral, right? And she said, oh, I didn't know that. That sounds great. She's like, yeah, but, what if you do it? I said, Grandma, I'm not going to do that again. I said, I've learned my lesson, I've got some knowledge here. I even met with some therapists while I was in jail. Like, I got this, I got a pretty good handle on this thing now. So she comes and she gets me out, right? And that day I went to the liquor store to celebrate. Right? Obviously, a drink's in order, right? I got to take the edge off here. I just did some hard time. And within 2 weeks, I was rearrested for another strong arm robbery charge at the Rite Aid in Morristown. And I was also taking my grandmother's debit card while she was asleep, and I was withdrawing money regularly, right? So she also pressed charges on me, which, they were third-degree credit card theft and fraud and stuff like that. But anyways, I go back to jail, and the judge tells me, he says, yeah, you're an absolute menace to society, and we cannot release you. I'm giving you a no bail order. We have to figure out your situation before you can ever hit the streets again. Okay, no problem. Shortly after that arraignment hearing, we had a little situation in the jail. And I don't know about you guys, but when I'm kicking, I get this real slick mouth, and I really become acutely aware of how stupid people are, and I like to tell them about themselves, right? And so I'm walking back up to my cell, and one of the COs tells me, he says, keep your mouth closed. Said something like that because I was talking. And I told him some things, mostly 4-letter words of what I thought about him. And they put me in solitary confinement, right? And so I'm in solitary confinement. I'm doing 23 hours and 45 minutes a day in this cell. I'm detoxing off of alcohol. I weigh 128 pounds. And they come to my door and they say, hey, your public defender is here. He wants to talk to you. I said, okay, all right. So I go and I meet with my public defender in the jail. And he says, the prosecutor's office wants to extend a deal for all of your charges. He said, just keep in mind that if you take all these charges to trial and you lose, your maximum exposure is 60 years for everything, right? He says, but the prosecutor's office has generously offered a 15-year sentence with an 85% stipulation, and you should consider it. I then told him some 4-letter words about himself, and I left, right? I go back into my cell, or onto the cell block, and I try to call my grandma. And I got rearrested shortly thereafter for trying to call her, and I was informed that my grandmother put a restraining order on me, right? And that there was a no contact order. And I don't know about you guys, but like for me, I always had grandma was that one person that I could always call. She was always there for me. She never turned her back on me. And this time she wasn't there. And this time I was getting charges just for trying to call her. And I went back into my cell. And I remember thinking to myself, and looking back, this was my first step one experience, right? Where step one really started to sink in for me. And I had no idea that's what was happening at the time. But it's always darkest before the dawn. And so I go back into my cell, and I realized in that moment that even if they were to release me free and clear, even if they dropped all my charges, even if my family invited me back into their life and my friends welcomed me back with open arms, I realized that I would drink again, right? Because that's what I always did. And I realized that I was powerless over this thing, and that I was really without a solution. And I decided then that I was going to kill myself. Spoiler alert, I didn't do it here. But I started to tie the sheets up, right? And I started to tie the sheets up, and I started to make a noose, and I was going to hang myself off of this. There was a sprinkler system on the wall by the ceiling. And as I was going to tie it off, one of the COs, for some reason, and they didn't do this a lot, but for some reason on that day, as he was doing his head count, he knocked on my door really hard, and I don't know if it was at delirium tremens. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a spiritual conviction, but something came over me that said if I was to surrender, everything would work out. And I had this inner conviction that everything was going to be okay. And I had no idea what that meant, right? So I ended up fighting my charges for a while. I'm going to fast forward quite a bit. I got the gun charge knocked off. I got a bunch of stuff downgraded. I'm in jail for like a year. And then I go, finally, they say, listen, enough's enough. You got to do something here. You got to take a plea agreement or we're taking you to trial. And so they offered me 6 years in state prison with an 85% stipulation. And they said, and if you sign this plea agreement, we'll give you the option to argue for drug court. Do you guys have drug court in PA? Yeah. They said, we'll give you the option to argue for drug court at your sentencing, but it'll be up to the judge's discretion. I looked at my lawyer, he's like, hey, it's not going to get any better than this. You better sign this. So I signed the plea agreement for 6. I go to my sentencing. My public defender comes down into the bullpen where I'm waiting to go to court, and he says, Anthony, the victim from the bank robbery case is here, and he's going to speak. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, let's just say when there's a victim of a violent crime, usually the judge likes to make an example out of you, right? Okay. So I go upstairs, I say my piece, prosecutor says his piece, and the judge looks and he says, and I understand the victim is here and would like to give a statement. So the victim stands up and he starts to say, well, Your Honor, anytime I have to go to the bank, I'm afraid that I'm going to be viciously assaulted. Anytime my family members have to use an ATM, I'm afraid that they might not come back home. And he starts to list off all these things which are absolutely true. I have no rebuttal, right? He's 100% accurate in what he's saying, and I probably deserve whatever's coming, right? And then out of nowhere, just like that, he says, but, Your Honor, he says, I'm a chaplain in the New Jersey State Prison System. And he said, if there's any chance that the drug court program could help this young man, please afford him the opportunity, right? And I don't know whose jaw hit the floor first, mine or the judge, right? And that was it. I could never look back after that, right? And I ended up, they sent me to like a Department of Correction style rehab down in South Jersey. If anybody's familiar with Atlantic City, it's a lovely city. You stay sober there, you stay sober anywhere. But I did, and I stayed sober there, and they sent me up to a halfway house up in Paterson, New Jersey, also a very scenic area. And I got in trouble while I was at Eva's. I got into a relationship with a staff member there, and she ended up getting fired, and I ended up going back to jail because I got terminated from the program. And then they sent me back to a rehab to learn to work on my behaviors, and I was resentful because I haven't picked up a drink or a drug. I don't realize that this whole thing is about my behaviors, right? I just don't see the connection there, right? So eventually, I get sent to Homeless Solutions, which is a shelter in Morristown. My whole family lives in Morristown. I got like 2 years without a drink or a drug. I'm not welcome at any of their houses. I got to go to a shelter, right? I go to this shelter. I went away when I was 22. I came home when I was 25. And I got to tell you guys, 20-something months without a drink or a drug and no spiritual remedy, and I'm one crazy guy, right? Because when I stop drinking, the noise up here gets real loud. And when I put the bottle down, that's really where my problems start, right? And I know I'm gonna drink again unless I do something about this. And I call my buddy Alex, who I met in jail, and he told me, he said, when you get out, so he got out about 6 months before I did. He said, when you get out, if you wanna stay sober, look me up, I'll be staying sober. And I looked him up on Facebook, I had no idea what to do. And I called him, I said, what do you do? I said, what's the secret? He said, I go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, get out of here. I said, nobody goes to alcohol. We just do that in jail. Nobody really does that, right? He's like, listen, this is the only thing that's helped me. He said, if you want my help, this is what I can offer you. If you find something better, let me know. Now I'm in a homeless shelter with 90 guys. I got no job, no work experience, no high school diploma, 6 felonies, and about 3 outfits. So I said, all right, well, would you mind picking me up? And he comes, he picks me up, he starts bringing me to meetings, which is still my home group to this day. It was the first meeting that we went to. And I was met with a fellowship that was loving and taught me everything that I know about this life and how to live to this day, right? I'm nothing without you guys. Let me just preface by saying that. And you know, I start to come around, and my sponsor, Tony Martins, God rest his soul, I said, Tony, I said, will you sponsor me? He said, no. He said, you got to follow me around for a month before I'll do anything with you. I want to see where you're at with it, right? So I had to follow him around. I went to 3 meetings a week, right? I had to set up the meeting. I had to break down the meeting. I had to do everything that I could to be of service. And then after a month, he said, all right. He said, let me ask you something. He said, do you know what your problem is? I said, yeah, alcohol and drugs. He said, no, kid. He said, that's your solution, right? Alcohol and drugs has always been your solution. That's why you keep going back to it, right? He said, this book, this is going to be your new solution. We're going to talk about how to live out of this book, right? And if you do this effectively, you won't need to drink anymore. And so that's what we did, you know. He explained to me some powerful things, step 1, right? Like, I get the powerless thing, right? I understand that I can't drink because when I drink, I can't stop, right? And when you look at the first page of We Agnostics, it asks you very simple questions. When I drink, can I control the amount I take? Or, when I want to stop, can I stay stopped entirely? And I can't answer either of those questions satisfactorily, right? That's, you know, I'm cooked on both accounts. I'm the real deal, right? I'm an alcoholic. What I didn't understand, though, was the unmanageability part of step 1. I didn't understand that once I put the plug in the jug, that doesn't make me all right, right? That's just the price of admission, right? Liquor was but a symptom, right? There's a whole lifetime of work here that I have to do day in and day out, and I get a daily reprieve. That's it, right? And he said to me, he said, so, you know, why did you drink the way you did? We talked about it. And I realized that alcohol was my higher power, effectively, and I was willing to go to any lengths to drink, right? And he said, if we're going to remove that, you're going to have a vacuum. He said, are you willing to believe that there's something else other than booze that's going to be able to save you? And I said, yeah, I'm willing to do that. And then I got to step 3, and I said, well, what is this all about? I don't know. You know, I'm Italian, I'm from North Jersey. Of course I was Catholic, I made confirmation. I didn't have to go to high school, but as long as I made confirmation, everything was good, right? And, I made communion, I made confirmation in the Catholic Church, and God didn't mean anything to me. All those years, it was never personal to me. I never had a relationship with my Creator, right? It never meant anything. And I get to step 3, and I said, what are we talking about here? And he said, shut up, kid. He said, you're not going to understand step 3 until you go on with the rest of the steps, right? He said, you're never going to have any idea what this is about unless you finish the rest of this, right? And so we did. I wrote out a 4-step. And my 4th step was probably the most pivotal point in my life. Because up until that time, I had created this ironclad narrative of why I was the way I was, my persona, why I acted the way I acted, why I had to be the way I had to be. And it was who I was. It was my whole identity, right? If my mom wasn't, an alcoholic and a drug addict, if my dad didn't kick me out, if the school didn't, terminate me, right? Like, if all these things, and he said, all right, write all that down, right? So the way I did my 4-step, we had 4 separate worksheets that we went through. Each worksheet had 4 columns, and we went through it, and I listed all my resentments, and I'll tell you, like, some of them were quite silly looking back, right? Some of them, I'm mad at my grandma, I'm resentful at my grandma because she called the cops on me and pressed charges on me. Okay, well, why did she do that? Well, because I stole her debit card while she was asleep, and she pressed charges. And then I do the little checkbox, right? It affects my personal ambitions, it affects my pocketbook, it affects X, Y, and Z. And then I get to the 4th part, right? What was my part? And I said, well, yeah, I guess I took her debit card, but she could have gave me the money when I asked her for it. And he said, shut up, Anthony, right? Listen to yourself. And I knew, right? Like, things started to become crystal clear for the first time in my life. I was able to look at things through a new lens. And then there were some more serious ones, right? Like my mom. My mom was a serious resentment that I harbored my whole life, right? And I'm talking to my core, right? And I had this resentment that basically said if she didn't raise me the way she did, and if she was more available and more present in my life, I wouldn't have turned out the way that I did. And then I got to the end, and I'm looking at the last column, and I said, well, tell me, Tony, because I'm always trying to be Mr. Right, right? And I got him here. Obviously, I'm right. I don't have a part in this, right? What can you tell me? And he said, well, your part here, Anthony, is forgiveness. That's it. Your part is forgiveness. And he said, furthermore, let's extrapolate. He said, based on your mother's life, the way she was raised, her conditioning, her life experiences, he said, do you realize that given all that stuff, the question is not, how could she have done this, but how could she have not, right? And he said, until you walk in somebody's shoes and you switch from how could this person have done this to how could this person have not, you probably haven't done enough work on the 4th step, right? And he said, I just want to give you one more bit of information. He said, do you realize that you could do to your children what your mother did to you and even worse? Message received, loud and clear, right? And all of a sudden, a lot of this hatred and this resentment and this ill will and this animosity kind of just sheds right off me, right? Because now I have a new perspective, right? Like Chuck C talks about, right? I put on a new pair of glasses for the first time in my life. I see things differently, right? And I can't change the past, but I can change the way I look at it, right? And that's what the 4-step did for me, right? I start to realize I got a lot of fears. I'm driven by about 100 forms, like the book talks about, right? And I'm always afraid that I'm going to lose something that I have, or I'm not going to get something that I want, right? And out of that stems 1,000,001 character defects, and you retaliate to those character defects, right? And all of a sudden I'm mad at you, right? And I didn't realize my whole life, I'm going through life and I'm trying to play the director. And I expect you to act a certain way, and I never gave you a script, so you're not going to act that way. And when you don't meet my expectations, I hate you for it, right? And I'm just getting sicker and sicker as the day goes by, right? And so I do this work with my sponsor, and I go through the 5th step with them. And then we get to 6 and 7, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I did a lot of soul searching on 6 and 7 the first time around, because I didn't, right? Like those were pretty much academic to me. I checked those boxes. I was really keen on trying to rush to 8 and 9, right? I did circle back, and I still work 6 and 7 as regularly as possible, because for me, that's now like some of the meat and potatoes, right? But at that time, I was rushing ahead because I wanted to show people that I was better, right? My ego wanted to get out there and show the world that I'm no longer this pathetic drunk, and I'm going to go make amends for my wrong. And I remember my sponsor had me get these note cards, these index cards to do step 8, right? And he gave me very specific instructions, and for a guy like me, specific instructions are paramount, right? Because I will kind of like do as I see fit, which is not what is suggested if I don't have specific instructions. And so I was to write on one side the person concerned, and then on the other side 4 specific steps for each amends. I have to explain to this person what it is that I'm trying to do and make sure that they're okay with it, right? I don't have any business forcing an amends on somebody to save my own skin. It's not appropriate. The second thing that I was to do is to explain in great detail and acknowledge all of my wrongs as vividly as I possibly could, so that I was acknowledging that I understood, and I put some thought and consideration into this. The third part of it was to ask if I forgot anything, which in most cases I did. And the fourth part of it was to just simply ask, what can I do to correct this? What can I do to amend this, right? And as I was writing out the note cards in my 8th step, I started to cry. Because by this point, like, I have some idea that other people maybe have feelings too. And I'm writing down things in graphic detail that I did that harm them, right? And I remember talking to my sponsor about it, and he said, Anthony, he said, listen, he said, this is what step 8 is about. You need to pray for the willingness to do this, and you need to pray for self-forgiveness. And he said, you only pray for self-forgiveness because that'll make you more effective when you go to make these amends. He said, if you go to make an amends in the 9th step and you fall apart because you haven't forgiven yourself, you're going to make it all about you, right? And that's not what this process is about. And for me, in my lineage, I was taught that I go to make this amends, I'm inviting the other person to heal, right? I'm inviting them to heal, and I'm trying to amend the situation to the best of my ability, right? And I remember getting to the 9th step, and there were some people on there. I'll give you an example. My Uncle Charlie. My Uncle Charlie's one of those older Italian guys, first generation Italian, and he never had a job or anything, but he had a lot of money, and he hung out down at the port in Newark, and he was that type of Italian. And I borrowed some money from him. Let me rephrase. I called him up one time, and I said, Uncle Charlie, I have these warrants. I need about $300 to get the warrants lifted so I don't go to jail. And he said, well, how do I know you're going to pay the warrants? I said, listen, you can bring me to the police department. You can drive me. You'll see it happen. He said, okay, I'll bring you up there. So he comes, picks me up, brings me to the police department, and if anybody's familiar with Morristown Police Department, the way that building is set up, the parking lot is in the back, there's a door in the back, right? So I have him park in the parking lot, I go in, into the door, and then I just walk out the front door and leave and turn my phone off, right? And I just went and I drank with the money, and that was it, right? So now I got to go make amends to my uncle. And I remember it was an Easter Sunday, and I called him up. I said, Uncle Charlie, could you come over to Easter Sunday a little early? I would like to make amends to you. I explained to him what I was trying to do. He said, sure, no problem. So he and my aunt came over, and I said, I'm real sorry about that thing with the money, and I was nervous, and it was one of my first amends that I was doing, and I slid the $300 across the table to him, and he slid the money back to me. He said, kid, this was never about money, right? Because his son died of alcohol detox on the floor of a jail cell, the same jail that I spent most of my time in. And he died on his 43rd birthday, and he left behind 5 kids, and he never got this thing. And my Uncle Charlie looked at me, and he said, your cousin Charlie died of this thing. And I'm raising his 5 kids, and I see sadness in their eyes every day because of this disease. And he said, I don't care about the money. He said, I just want you to go out there, stay sober, and try to help somebody else, right? And out of this process, I start to realize that nothing is face value. Nothing as simple and shallow as I want it to be or make it out to be, right? And I made amends to my mom, and that was one of the hard ones, because after some time, I kind of went back and forth and oscillated, like, I'm still upset about X, Y, and Z. I'm upset that she hasn't gotten sober. I'm upset, this and that. She's not there with her grandchildren. And my sponsor said, Anthony, enough's enough. Go make the amends. And my mom, I went and I made the amends, and I told her, I said, listen, I know you did the best you could with what you have. I know that you loved me. I know that I could do what you've done to me, and probably even worse, and I don't blame you. I know that this disease is real, and I saw what it did to me, and I just want to let you know that I love you, and and there's no animosity. It's all love from here on out. And we had a really beautiful moment, right? And it was very special, and I was grateful that I did that, because not too long after that, she actually passed away. Right? And she passed away when she was 52. And this disease is real, and it's by grace and grace alone that I'm able to be up here, right? And I recognize that today. So in any event, I made my amends and kind of did what I did, and I finished my amends, and I learned how to live with God's children one day at a time, right? You guys taught me how to live. And then I approached step 10, and this is something that I still use every day, right? And the other day I had to call somebody. I wrote down, I bring my little book with me everywhere, and I remember early on I would call my sponsor and I would complain about some stuff, and he would answer the phone and he would say page 86 and hang up the phone. And that was it, right? Because I can fix most things in my life with page 86, right? Like, it's usually something that I need to ask myself those questions. And if I'm being honest with myself, I usually figure out what's going on. And the other day I had to call up a coworker and I had to tell him, I've been gossiping about you. I've been gossiping about you, man, and I've been kind of stepping on your neck to make myself appear bigger, right? And that's not cool. It's not going to happen again. What can I do to correct this? I'll talk to the boss, like, whatever you need me to do. And he's one of us, and he works a program, and he said, you're not the only one who's ever done that, right? It's fine. But these are things that I have to do, because that type of stuff will make me sick. That type of behavior, if it goes unchecked, I will get sick, right? And all of a sudden, little things like that will turn into way bigger things. And then step 11, I'm very fortunate with my setup. I work from home, so I meditate and I pray every morning for about 30 minutes in the sauna. And I'm very fortunate to spend that time. And I started to realize some things in my 11-step practice, right? And as recent as today, you know, I go to a lot of kids' birthday parties today because I have 2 daughters, and I said, you know, Aunt, it's kind of ridiculous that like you're scared to sing happy birthday because you're afraid people might think that you're goofy looking, right? Like, and that's something I spent time in prayer and meditation, and it just came to me. It's like, you're an idiot. Nobody cares if you should sing happy birthday. You're a weirdo if you don't sing happy birthday, right? And it's little stuff like that. Like I can continue to seek and more things will continue to be revealed. And in my 12th step, you know, I sponsor as many guys as will have me. Essentially, I make myself available for sponsorship anytime. I bring guys to meetings. I do all that I can, even when I don't want to, because that's when I usually get the best results, right? And to just kind of bring it full circle, I don't want to go over, I talked about my grandmother's house, right? I almost lost that house because of my actions. And we were able to save it from the bail bondsman. We paid some extra money and they let her keep the house. My grandma, when I was about 5 years sober, she called me up, and I had just gotten married and I had just had a baby, and my grandma calls me up and she says, Anthony, she says, your grandfather and I are going to lose the house. My grandfather had cancer. There was a lot of debt going on medically. Just wanted to let you know, basically your childhood house is going to be gone. And I talked to my wife about it. And my wife said, well, we have like $20,000. Maybe we could, qualify for a mortgage. And my grandma owed, not a lot of money on the house, but the medical debt was really getting her. And we were able to buy my grandma's house, pay off her medical debt, and she and my grandfather lived with my wife and I up until my grandfather's dying moments. And I was the one who got to change his diapers when he was on hospice care, right? I was the one who was there for him when nobody else could be, right? My grandma still lives with us to this day. My 2 daughters still wake her up every morning at like 5:30. And she tells me she wouldn't have it any other way, right? And I didn't know how to live. I was really out there without a design for this thing called life. My only solution was drinking. And I have a life that's far beyond anything that I deserve or could have dreamt of, right? That guy who I robbed at the bank, he showed up for me. And he was the walking, talking epitome of grace in the flesh, right? And I remember I was doing some volunteer work, and I was trying to go into the jail where I had been locked up to run meetings. And I had to do this background check, and they ran my social, and they said, we would love to have you come in, but we can't allow it because there's somebody that works in this jail from now and then, or, now and again, that you robbed. Now, by this point, I was like maybe 6 years sober or something like that. I wasn't really thinking, like I just didn't draw the connection. And the CO he was one of the guys that went to school with my dad. So I said, just Ron, tell me who is it? Who is it? Like, I just want to, I'm fine, I'm not going to come in, but who is it? I don't know who I robbed here. And he said, yeah, I guess it was an older guy, says you robbed him at a PNC bank or something. And I said, are you serious? He said, yeah. He's like, why are you so happy about that? I'm like, no, I have an amends letter. I have to give to this man. And I haven't been able to find him, right? And I said, listen, please ask your supervisor, ask the captain, can you give this letter to this man, right? He said, yeah, I'll ask him. So they actually gave the guy my letter where I made amends to him. There was a no contact order, but they made a special exception for this. Gave him the letter, he read it, and he wrote me back, right? And I had a full circle moment there where if I wasn't trying to volunteer for this program, I don't ever get to close that, right? There's no closure for me or for him, right? in his letter, he said, I kind of wondered how things have been for you, right? Like, I never knew what happened, and I'm so glad to hear. And he was a man of God, right? And he was happy for me, right? And these are the types of things that this program has given me, right? Apart from you, I'm nothing, right? And I know that. And if I want to check my spiritual condition, I can always do so by just seeing how far I am from you, right? So with that, I want to thank you guys for my life. I appreciate your time tonight.
All right, again, my name's Brian. I'm an alcoholic. First and foremost, the group would like to thank Anthony for coming out here tonight, delivering an incredible message of hope and recovery to our group here. A couple quick announcements and we'll wrap up the meeting. As I said before the meeting, we have food and fellowship every week, 8 o'clock, so feel free to come early and join us. If you want to get involved with some service, even better. If you want to help us out with a little bit of service, after the meeting, we could use help putting the chairs away. We're going to put some of them back on those tables. Most of them will go up on the rack in the corner there. This group's all about service. We do have H&I commitments. We do one on Sunday night. If you're interested in coming out, going out to a treatment center that we go to, sharing maybe 5-10 minutes of your time, they really appreciate it. We do it every Sunday night. It is customary for us to thank our speakers. They do come here on their own time and expense, so we do usually form in a line in the front here, and we thank our speakers on a personal level if you care to do so. Just want to thank everybody for helping out tonight, especially shorthanded. Wanted to thank all our greeters, our readers. Thanks to Jason for helping out in the kitchen there. And let's thank our speaker, Anthony. And, if you do care to join us, we have a beautiful way of closing down the meeting. We are going to circle up and close with our Lord's Prayer here. We will close down, as always, with a brief moment of silence for the still sick and suffering alcoholic inside and outside of these rooms, followed by our Lord's Prayer. Our Father,